Look, I'm only posting this because I don't know who else to turn to. I'm typing this out on a crappy laptop at a 24-hour diner just off Interstate 87. It's 4:15 a.m. The coffee tastes like battery acid, and my hands are shaking so bad I can barely hold the mug. Every few seconds, I look out the fogged glass toward the parking lot, half expecting to see a rusted front bumper idling under the streetlights. If you live anywhere in upstate New York, right around the western lip of the Adirondacks, and your GPS ever tries to reroute you onto an old rusted stretch of asphalt marked Route 9 South, ignore it. I don't care if the interstate is backed up for 30 miles. I don't care if your gas light is on. Just stay on the main highway. To understand why I'm saying this, you have to understand how desperate I was 3 weeks ago. My landlord had already stuck a 3-day eviction notice right on my apartment door. My bank account was sitting at -$42. When you're that close to sleeping in your car, you don't ask questions when a lifeline drops out of nowhere. The ad was tucked at the bottom of page 4 on a local Craigslist board. No company logo, no corporate layout. It just said, overnight toll monitor. Route 9 sector, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., $45 an hour. Must have reliable transportation and pass a background check. $45 an hour just to sit on my ass and watch a coin machine. I called the number before I could even think it through. A guy with a voice like grinding gravel answered on the second ring. He didn't ask for a resume or my experience. He just asked if I minded being alone for long stretches, and if I had any history of sleepwalking. When I told him no, he told me to meet him at the Route 9 maintenance pull-off the following night at 10:30 p.m. sharp. That stretch of road should have been my first warning. Route 9 hasn't been on official state tourist maps since the late 1980s. The trees have grown so thick and aggressive along the shoulders that their branches literally weave together overhead, cutting off the moonlight and creating this permanent, suffocating tunnel over the blacktop. When I finally got there, the maintenance pull-off turned out to be nothing more than a gravel clearing cut into the pines. Standing under a single, flickering floodlight were 4 tiny, bulletproof glass booths straddling 4 automated lanes. It looked entirely out of place, like a sterile, modern checkpoint dropped into the middle of an ancient forest. The guy who hired me called himself Vance. He wore a faded, navy blue state transport uniform that looked 20 years old, but it lacked any official state seals or badges. He didn't shake my hand. He just gestured for me to follow him into booth 4. "The job is automated," Vance said, his eyes scanning the dark tree line rather than looking at me. "The commuters drop their exact change into the baskets. The gates lift. They drive through. Your only job is to sit here, keep an eye on the digital camera feeds, and make sure the physical mechanisms don't jam up." "And if they do?" I asked, eyeing the heavy bank vault lock on the booth door. Vance reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a laminated, double-sided sheet of paper, laying it flat on the metal desk. "If anything deviates from the standard routine, you consult the sheet," Vance said. His voice dropped an octave, losing any trace of casual friendliness. "You don't improvise. You don't call the police. You don't leave this booth until 6 a.m. when the automated day locks click open. If you break a single instruction on this paper, you won't live long enough to cash your first paycheck." I laughed, expecting him to crack a smile or admit it was a joke. He didn't. He just turned on his heel, walked out of the booth, got into an unmarked white pickup truck, and drove away into the dark. I was completely alone. For the first 2 weeks, absolutely nothing happened. And honestly, that was the hardest part. The silence out there isn't normal. There are no crickets, no owls, no wind rustling the pines, just the low, hypnotic hum-hum-hum of the fluorescent light tubes inside my booth. By night 4, the isolation started playing tricks on my mind. I found myself reading the laminated sheet over and over again, just to have something to look at. I memorized the text, and the more I read it, the more uncomfortable I became. Rule 1. The toll is exactly $2.50. If a car approaches and the driver hands you a $50 bill without making eye contact, take it, print a receipt, and do not look in their rearview mirror. Rule 2. Between 2 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., A matte black sedan with completely blacked out windows will pull up to lane 3. There is no driver inside. You will hear the sound of a child crying from the trunk. Do not press the emergency gate release. Wait exactly 60 seconds, and the gate will lift on its own. Rule 3. If a vehicle approaches from the wrong direction, driving north in the southbound lane, do not blink. Keep your eyes locked on its front bumper until it vanishes from sight. If you blink, it will stop. Rule 4. If the automated coin machine in lane 2 starts rattling like something is trying to claw its way out from the coin return slot, turn off your booth lights immediately. Press your back against the floor. Do not look up at the glass windows until you hear the sound of heavy rain, even if the sky was perfectly clear when you started your shift. Rule 5. You are not keeping things out of the highway. The toll booths are the locking mechanism keeping something vast underneath the asphalt. If all 4 booth gates open at the exact same time, you have 3 minutes to run into the woods. Do not look back at the road. By week 3, I had totally convinced myself it was all just an elaborate psychological experiment. Some sick corporate test to see how long a desperate guy would follow insane instructions for $45 an hour. Then came last night. It was 1:14 a.m. The fog had rolled in thick off the mountains, settling over the asphalt like a heavy, gray blanket. I was passing the time by playing a game on my phone when the sensor chime echoed through the booth. Ding! A pair of headlights cut through the fog, approaching lane 4. It was an old tan station wagon, the body panels covered in rust. It idled up to my window, its engine knocking loudly. I rolled down my small glass slider to greet them, expecting a lost tourist. The man in the driver's seat was wearing a faded, gray business suit. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes locked dead ahead on the closed yellow gate, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He didn't say a word. He just slowly raised his right hand and held out a clean, crisp $50 bill. My breath hitched in my throat. My mind raced back to the laminated sheet. Rule 1. Take it, print a receipt, and do not look in their rearview mirror. My hand shook as I took the bill. It felt freezing cold to the touch, like it had been sitting in a freezer. I turned to my terminal, pressed the button to print the receipt, and handed it back to him through the slot. The moment his fingers took the paper, the automated gate lifted. The station wagon slowly began to roll forward, and that's when my human curiosity ruined everything. I knew the rule. I had read it 100 times, but as the back of the car cleared my window, my eyes automatically darted upward to the car's side view mirror. I looked. There was no reflection of the highway behind him. There was no reflection of my booth. Inside the glass of the mirror, all I could see was a vast, pitch-black ocean under a sky filled with dying, red stars, and floating just beneath the surface of that black water were hundreds of pale, bloated human faces, all staring out of the glass directly at me. The station wagon disappeared into the fog, but the hum of the fluorescent lights above me suddenly changed pitch, turning into a low, vibrating whine. I sat back down in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had broken Rule 1. I had looked, and according to the clock on the wall, it was now exactly 1:58 a.m., 2 minutes until the window for Rule 2 opened. The digital clock on the booth console flipped to 2 a.m. The low whine of the fluorescent tubes grew louder, vibrating through the metal desk until my teeth ached. The fog outside had thickened to an unnatural degree. It pressed against the bulletproof glass like a solid wall of curdled milk, completely swallowing the other 3 lanes. I couldn't even see the yellow safety gate directly in front of my own booth anymore. Then, a sharp, loud burst of static shattered the silence. I jumped, nearly knocking my tepid coffee onto my lap. The sound wasn't coming from my phone. It was coming from an old, dusty Motorola two-way radio mounted to the wall beneath the desk. I hadn't noticed it during my first 2 weeks because it had been completely dead. No lights, no battery indicator, nothing. Now, its small analog screen was glowing a faint, radioactive green. Fourth shift. Respond. Booth 4, do you copy? The voice was warped by heavy atmospheric static, but I recognized the flat, gravelly cadence immediately. It was Vance.
My hand shook as I reached down and unhooked the heavy plastic receiver. I pressed the push-to-talk button. Vance? Vance, is that you? Look, something is wrong out here. A car just went through lane 4. I think I messed up. I looked in the mirror. There was a long, agonizing pause. The static hissed, rising and falling like the sound of distant waves. Warned you about the mirrors, kid. Vance's voice cut through, sounding incredibly far away. The mirrors show the reservoir. Don't look again. If you look 3 times, they don't even need the gates to take you. What reservoir? Vance, what is this place? I practically yelled into the mic. The floor is vibrating. The air smells like old pennies. Come get me. I don't care about the $45 anymore, just come lock up. Can't do that, the radio crackled. The daylocks are set. Nobody comes down Route 9 until 6 a.m. Not even me. Listen to me carefully. What does the console say for lane 3? I glanced over at the digital interface. A small red indicator light was blinking next to the monitor feed for lane 3. It says there's a vehicle idling, I whispered, my throat going dry. But I can't see anything through the fog. It's 2:03 a.m., Vance said. His voice was suddenly devoid of static, perfectly, terrifyingly clear. Rule 2. The black sedan. Do not touch the override switch. If the trunk opens, do not look at it on the camera feed. Just close your eyes and count to 60. Vance, wait. And kid. If the radio clicks 3 times without me speaking, turn it off. Pull the battery out. Don't let it talk to you. The line went dead. The green backlight on the radio screen flickered out. I stood there in the suffocating silence, the plastic receiver heavy in my palm. My eyes slowly drifted to the closed-circuit monitor on my desk. The camera for lane 3 was a grainy, black and white feed. Through the pixelated static of the screen, I could make out the silhouette of a long, heavy vehicle. It had no headlights on. The windows were so dark they looked like rectangles of pure charcoal cut out of the air. Rule 2. There is no driver inside. You will hear the sound of a child crying from the trunk. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Then, a tiny muffled sound leaked through the booth's external intercom system. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails picking at carpet. A second later, the scratching stopped, replaced by a sound that made my chest tighten so hard I couldn't breathe. It was a child's voice. High-pitched, muffled, and desperate, echoing clearly from the trunk of the sedan on lane 3. Mommy? It's dark in here, Mommy, let me out, I can't breathe. The intercom picked up a violent thump from inside the trunk, followed by a frantic, breathless sob. Every protective instinct in my brain screamed at me to hit the red emergency gate release button on my desk. It was right there. A single press would lift the gate and let the car go. It would end the crying. I reached my hand out. My finger hovered less than an inch above the red button. Click, click, click. I froze. The 3 sharp clicks hadn't come from the intercom. They had come from the dead, unpowered Motorola radio in my hand. The screen didn't light up this time. But from the cold speaker grid, a voice began to whisper. It wasn't Vance. It was my own voice. It sounded exactly like me, but warped, speaking in a flat, monotone cadence. Press the button, my own voice whispered from the radio. Press it. Let us out. We are so cold under the asphalt. Press it. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as my own voice continued to warp and hiss out of the speaker grid. Press it. Press the button. We want to meet you. With a panicked yelp, I dropped the receiver. It slammed onto the metal desk. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get a grip on the radio's plastic casing. I fumbled with the release tabs on the back, forcing them down until the heavy lithium battery pack popped out and clattered onto the floor. The screen stayed dead. The battery was sitting 3 feet away from the device. But the speaker didn't stop.
Why don't you want to let us out?
The voice whispered, the tone shifting from a monotone drawl to a wet, raspy wheeze. We've been watching you watch the screen for 14 days. You look so lonely in your little glass box. I scrambled backward, my boots kicking on the concrete floor until my spine slammed hard against the vault-locked door of the booth. I covered my ears with my hands, but the sound seemed to vibrate directly through the bulletproof glass itself. Outside, the muffled, Agonizing sobs of the child in the trunk of lane 3 grew louder, layering over the wet whispers of the unpowered radio. The two sounds twined together, creating a maddening, discordant cacophony that filled the tiny, pressurized room. "Count to 60, Vance had said. "Just close your eyes and count to 60. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in my knees. 1, 2, 3. Every second felt like an eternity. 21, 22. The voice on the radio began to laugh, a wet, rattling sound like a throat filled with fluid. 45. 46. Ding! The lane sensor chime cut through the noise. A loud, mechanical clang followed as the yellow gate for lane 3 lifted on its own. Through the glass, I heard the low, heavy purr of the matte black sedan as it slowly accelerated, rolling forward into the soup-thick fog until the sound of the engine vanished completely. The radio went dead silent. The crying stopped. I let out a long, ragged breath, trembling as I pulled my hands away from my ears. The air inside the booth had grown freezing cold, turning my breath into pale plumes of vapor. I dragged myself back up to the chair, my knees weak. I looked at the digital wall clock. 3:14 a.m. I had survived the window. I had kept my finger off the emergency button. A wave of profound, exhausting relief washed over me. I reached for my cold coffee, my hands still trembling, telling myself that if I could just hold out for less than 3 hours, the daylocks would click open, and I could drive away from Route 9 forever. Then, the clock flipped to 3:15 a.m. From the deep, pitch-black woods to the south, a low, guttural roar echoed down the valley. It didn't sound like a standard car engine. It sounded like an old, massive V8 engine with a cracked manifold, screaming at full throttle. A split second later, a pair of blinding, yellow, high beams pierced through the fog. My breath caught in my throat. The headlights weren't approaching from the north, they were heading directly toward me, traveling the wrong way down the southbound asphalt, accelerating straight toward lane 1. The light was blinding, it cast long, distorted shadows across the interior of my booth as the vehicle roared closer. It was a heavy, rusted, 1970s-era pickup truck. The chrome bumper was dented and smeared with dark, dried stains. Rule 3. If a vehicle approaches from the wrong direction, do not blink. Keep your eyes locked on its front bumper until it vanishes from sight. If you blink, it will stop. I gripped the edge of the metal desk, widening my eyes until the skin stretched taut. I stared dead at that dented steel bumper. The truck was moving incredibly fast, a roaring wall of rusted metal. The glare of the high beams hit the glass windows of my booth, refracting into 1,000 jagged needles of pure, white light that stabbed directly into my retinas. A wave of intense, burning dryness hit my eyeballs. "Don't do it," I screamed at myself. "Do not close your eyes." The truck was right there, it was passing lane 1. Just one more second and it would be gone into the fog behind me. But the agonizing burn was too much. A violent, involuntary reflex seized my eyelids, my eyes slammed shut. It lasted less than a quarter of a second, a tiny, microscopic fraction of time. But the moment my eyelids parted, the roaring of the V8 engine was gone. Complete, suffocating silence fell over Route 9. The rusted pickup truck hadn't vanished. It was parked dead in lane 1, idling in absolute silence right next to my booth window. The driver's side window was rolled down, and from the darkness inside the cab, a pale, elongated arm slowly reached out, pointing a single, trembling finger directly at my face. The pale, elongated arm hung perfectly still in the freezing air, its graying finger locked onto my face through the glass. I couldn't move, my muscles felt like concrete. The headlights of the truck were still on, casting a sickening, yellow glow through the dense fog. I stared at the driver's side cab, trying to see the face behind that impossible arm. The interior was completely dark, save for the faint, green glow of the truck's dashboard lights. Then, the driver leaned forward into the light. It wasn't a monster, it was Vance. But it wasn't the man who had hired me 3 weeks ago. His skin was translucent, stretched so tight over his skull that his cheekbones looked ready to puncture the flesh. His jaw hung open at an unnatural, unhinged angle, loose and swinging like a broken door hinge. When he spoke, his tongue didn't move. The voice came from deep within his chest, wet and echoing. "You blinked, kid," Vance rasped. The sound was like dry autumn leaves scraping across a sidewalk. "I told you, if you break a single instruction, you won't live long enough to cash the check." "Vance," I choked out, my voice barely a whisper against the glass. "Please, help me." The thing wearing Vance's face smiled. It was a wide, jagged grin that split his lower lip, letting a thick, black fluid trickle down his chin. "Vance isn't here anymore. Vance blinked in 1994. We just keep his clothes." The unhinged jaw snapped shut with a horrific, bone-crushing crack. Before I could even process the sound, a violent explosion of noise erupted from right behind me. It was Lane 2. Wirt clack clack clack, the automated coin drop machine wasn't jamming. The heavy iron basket was shaking so violently that the bolts anchoring it to the concrete were ripping out. From inside the narrow coin return slot, a sound emerged. It wasn't the clinking of quarters, it was the frantic, desperate sound of dozens of long, metallic fingernails clawing at the inside of the steel chute. Rule 4, turn off your booth lights immediately. Press your back against the floor. Do not look up at the glass windows until you hear the sound of heavy rain.
I lunged for the main breaker switch on the wall, slamming it down. Darkness swallowed booth 4. The only illumination left was the sickly yellow high beams of the truck cutting through the glass. I dropped to my knees, throwing myself flat against the cold concrete floor. I pressed my spine hard against the base of the metal desk, burying my face in my arms, staring at the floor dust. Above me, the clawing sound stopped. A second later, a wet, heavy slap echoed against the roof of the booth. Something massive had jumped from lane 2 onto the top of my glass box. The fixed steel supports grooved into the ceiling groaned under an immense, shifting weight. Then came the dragging sound. A slow, rhythmic slap 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 as a massive, wet organ dragged itself across the bulletproof windows. A terrible, suffocating stench filtered through the tiny air vents. It smelled like a flooded basement, copper, and old, corroded pennies. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body convulsing with silent, terrified sobs. "Rain," I prayed. "Please let it rain." I listened to the sky. Nothing. The night air outside was bone dry. Suddenly, a loud, synchronized clang 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 shook the entire valley. It was the heavy pneumatic gears of the automated highway gates. I didn't need to look at the digital console to know what it meant. The mechanical groans of all 4 barriers lifting echoed in perfect unison through the fog. Rule 5, the toll booths are the locking mechanism keeping something vast underneath the asphalt. If all 4 booth gates open at the exact same time, you have 3 minutes to run into the woods. Do not look back at the road. The concrete floor beneath my chest violently buckled. A massive, tearing screech ripped through the air as the asphalt outside split wide open. The vibration was so intense it shattered the bottom pane of the booth window, showering my legs with glass. A deep, low rumble vibrated from miles beneath the earth, a sound that felt less like an earthquake and more like a colossal, ancient chest cavity taking its very first breath after centuries of burial. I didn't think anymore. The 3-minute timer was running. I scrambled to my feet, threw open the heavy vault door of the booth, and bolted straight into the pitch-black wall of pine trees, tightly gripping my phone in my pocket. The forest air was freezing, instantly turning my panicked breath into thick white plumes. Behind me, the sound of tearing metal and collapsing concrete echoed through the valley as Route 9 completely tore itself apart. I ran blindly, using my phone's flashlight beam to cut through the heavy fog. Branches whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I didn't feel it. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping my legs moving. I must have run for 2 minutes straight before my light caught a shape up ahead. A man was standing perfectly still between 2 massive pine trees. He wore a faded corporate suit, his arms hanging limply at his sides. I skidded to a halt, my boots digging into the wet pine needles. Hey, we have to go. The highway is collapsing." He didn't move. He didn't turn. I took a cautious step closer, shining the phone light onto his face. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit of horror. It was the commuter from Rule 1, the man who had handed me the $50 bill without making eye contact. His eyes were wide open, completely glassy, staring blankly up at the dark canopy. He was breathing, but his mouth was locked in a rigid, silent scream. I backed away, panicking, and swung the phone light to the left. There were more of them, dozens of them, standing in neat, straight rows among the trees like a twisted orchard. I saw a woman in a minivan sweater.
I saw a teenager in a college hoodie. I saw truck drivers, commuters, and entire families. Thousands of people who had taken Route 9 over the decades, all standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, frozen in place, staring directly up at the sky. Then, the catastrophic rumbling from the highway suddenly stopped. In the dead, suffocating silence of the forest, a synchronized, wet crack echoed through the trees. All at once, every single one of the thousands of missing drivers snapped their heads down. They weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, pointing long, pale fingers toward the edge of the woods where I had just run from. "It's out," the man in the suit whispered. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "It's out," the woman next to him repeated.
The chant spread through the dark woods like wildfire, thousands of voices layering into a deafening drone. The dead-eyed, pale drivers began stepping forward in unison, closing the circle around me, their hands reaching out to point back at the highway. A vast, dark silhouette was slowly rising above the tree line, blotting out the stars, dragging a massive shape out from beneath the split asphalt. I screamed, shoved my phone deep into my pocket, turned around, and sprinted away from the closing circle. I scrambled over the buckled, smoking concrete of the outer road barrier, found my old sedan still parked untouched in the employee gravel lot, and drove like a maniac through the grass until I finally hit a state-county road. Whew. I'm safe now. I'm at this diner, but I finally figured out what the toll booths were actually doing. They weren't collecting money, they were collecting attention. The entity under the road feeds entirely on human awareness. It needed people to look at its rules. It needed people to wonder what it was. Every time a driver focused on that booth, a piece of their consciousness was trapped there, anchoring the entity beneath the earth. By breaking the rules, I broke the seal. And now, I realize the most terrifying part of Rule 5. The entity is free, and it is moving. It follows the paths of those who know its patterns. If you are reading this post, you now know the rules. You are thinking about it. You are feeding its awareness. If you start hearing the sound of heavy rain outside your window tonight, and the sky is completely clear, do not look up at the glass. It knows who is looking for it.